Today I present you FlashKeeper, where SpiSpy meets Stateless Laptop Jaded Dreams. Our retrofit plan first. So the plan of today, I would just go point by point like it's going to refresh at every slide. So I would start by who I am. I'm Thierry Lorion. I started Insurgo in 2017, I think. I did the Privacy Beast at first to bring back like used computers, core boot and everything inside of CubesOS. I was certified. I sold the laptop until 2019. Most of my work is granted funded work by NLNet. This project, FlashKeeper, is also funded, was recently funded. Yeah, and I'm the heads maintainer. That's what I do. Everything that I do is to facilitate accessibility to security and confidentiality. So my goal here is to always try to make things like easier for everybody. And your feedback is really important on everything that I do. So please contact me on GitHub. I'm not alone here. The main brain of this project is actually the Doid. He will be present at the end of the talk. He's the mechanical engineer that decided to participate in this crazy dream of mine of this project. Why this talk? A big disclaimer. Normally, I tend to talk of the things after I release them, after I finish the project. This is the first time that I talk about it like once it's just an idea. So the goal of this talk is to get your input. So I will try to go really quick, but yeah, I have a tendency of talking a bit too much. So I would try to not talk too much this time. Why x86 situation is problematic. The problem that we have today is that the root of trust inside of core boot is basically inside of the boot block. The only alternative that is pushed forward since for a really long time is bootguard, but bootguard is also problematic. All the other projects that try to make this thing like easier is depending on write protection security features that are normally dependent as well on SPI chips. So even yesterday I talked to Nova Custom, and they said that even in the same batch of laptops that are being delivered to them, the SPI chips are different. So we cannot really rely on chips that are supposedly present in our laptops to always be the same. So that's that. 3M Dev here already made an amazing work on past grant work as well to support part region. Anyway, we said it like part region write protection, meaning that you can decide like to try to protect just the boot block, but it will overlap a bit. And then even if you just protect the boot block, it means that if core boot decides to change the boot block, then if you try to write to that region that is write protected and it's a little bit like larger, or if anything changes there, then you're kind of locked out of your own laptop. That and the fact that each time that you try to apply the region protection, you also need to solder the pins so that the protection is actually activated. So it's really not perfect. So you have like to solder write protection to ground, and that's not good. So the only solution that is really there right now is bootguard, and bootguard, as we know, is fused with keys like inside of the CPU, meaning that for the lifetime of your laptop, once the key is fused, it's one-time programmable fuse, so it's OTP. You cannot decide to flash your own firmware anymore. You're kind of stuck with the OEM providing you the firmware forever. And we also know that bootguard keys have leaked before. The MSI situation is there to prove it. The keys were leaked 1.5 years ago, and there were no recall whatsoever. Nothing punished them for their bad behaviors. Intel didn't do anything about that. You can actually download the private keys yourself, and we could decide today to do a new firmware image for MSI. Anyway, that's just to prove my point. So basically right now we are living in a plug and pray situation with the computers that we try to trust. And the question here is like, what can we do as open source software to try to challenge that? And this project is an attempt to that. as a retrofit. I'm not talking about like new designs. Why FlashKeeper? Like I said, it's a retrofit design. So what we try to do is to sit on top of already existing solutions. So this works also for your laptop, desktop, server, TV, remote, embedded project that you have, any personal project that you try to attempt as well. The goal of this is has multiple goals, actually. It's to permit like core boot developers to quickly flash their projects, to implement write protection as a software dumper so that you can actually decide that you write protect your state right now, and I will talk about like the details later. But the most important part is for introspection of what is happening from the PCH. So how the computer, the host, is actually reading the firmware, how, when, talk to attacks and everything, and being able to do a bootstream validation, which is a coin term here. The goal at the end of the project would be to be able to check some parts of the flash region. So we're far ahead. Like I said, it's an ID. We don't know how it will go, like the project is scoped and everything, but like the end goal would be, for example, to say really early by singing, like the speaker modem inside of core boot, like this thing that can actually sing you a song, but being able to say, okay, but the boot block is compromised, like it's not the signature that we expect, so sing really early to say that the computer is not in the state that you expect. So what we want at the end of this is temper prevention, but also temper evidence. Like everything inside of EDS you already know, most probably, is about temper evidence. But here we try to push it further in the sense that if something change, we want it to be able to be blocked, but we want something that will interact with the user out of band. So something that will say to you, don't type your passphrase right now because your computer is not in the state that you signed, so in the state that you decided that was trustable. No lockdown, and like I said, it would be applicable to a lot of other projects. So the goal here is to apply this to everything that already existed. And Joanna Rutowska, her last talk, I think, was in 2015, and she pushed the dream of like a stateless computer. And I think this project would be the first step so that we can convince manufacturer to do something different for the future. So what will be FlashKeeper? Like the high level is this. I will read with you, but like FlashKeeper is a device that can permanently be installed on common flash chips. It attaches to the chip either by being soldered or with a peel and stick layer with spring-loaded contacts, interfacing with the SPI chip pins for easy OS and SPI introspection, write protection, and external reprogramming. This is the really big draft of how it would be for the solderless version. The idea there is to have like spring-loaded contacts with what we will develop as being like a FPGA MCU on top of that. And the idea would be that to be epoxied or resin so that the people wanting to have like temper protection, all of this would be glued under something, And after that, the interface, the cable would be outside so that we can reprogram and everything, and being able to provide keys that are user ownable and transfer of ownership. I will go back to that a little bit later. So that's it. Is the introspection. So the three goals there, I think I'm repeating myself, but like introspection, write protection, and easy external programming, internal programming. The goal here, and we don't know exactly how it will go there, is, as I said, since we don't have the control of what SPI chips security features are there, we don't know if we can actually apply the right protection of the chips that are already in the laptop. So I think that the way that we will go forward will be probably to have an SPI chip inside of the FPGA that we will use, that we know that the right protection can be enforced, and then software flip the bits to have the right protection in place. Here it's a really long thing to say that basically allowing authentication for external programming with write protection control, independently verifying the SPI flash image bootstream against a user-controlled detached signature, at each boot prior of the platform owner to enter any secret. So the building blocks. SPI-SPI, I don't know who here already knows that project. 1%, 2%. That was a project for kind of my mentor, like Tramel Hudson, developed that. The goal of that was to be able to facilitate the reprogramming. The firmware is running completely in memory inside of the FPGA. And then you connect this with a normal clip on your SPI chip. So the computer is actually booting something that is in memory inside of your FPGA. So that permits you like to iteratively and really fastly flash device, because you're not actually flashing. You're saying, I want this firmware to run. It runs from memory. And this project was really, really nice for security research and purposes, because you can actually have a tracing of what is read, when, in which order, and use that to discover a lot of TOC2 attack, which means like something that is actually read before of execution, so there is change. So what you see here is like the moment of read and the moment of execution is not at the same time. So what of attacks were discovered with this project. We will use it as a base so that we can actually see what are the timings, being able to iterate in development so that we can have a base, which is the FPGA that we want to base the research on, to create a really small factor. You know, like the SPI-SPI is like a big board that will be outside. It will depend on either the solderless or solder adapter that will be inside of the motherboard. So that's the base of the development. With that, we will be able to say, like, answer a really important question for us, because we want to know if we have enough time for the FPGA to boot itself from the bootstream. And if we're able to do that, it means that the bootstream will be able to execute just enough, like enough boot to be able, like, to sign and verify what is inside of the SPI flash of the FPGA. And if we can do that, it means that we will have something that can be upgradable on the FPGA, and that's the goal. Because if we can do that, it means that a lot of collaboration will be possible on that project, meaning that you will be able to sign what will be your firmware, and then you can iterate the development on the features that you want inside of the FlashKeeper. But it's still going to be validated. And one of the goals that we try to push inside of this project is to go against what BootGuard is doing right now, which is like one signature fused one time, and then you cannot transfer ownership. So what we're trying to do here is that the first owner will always be in control for the second owner, and then there's a transfer of ownership of the key. So if today I decide to give my laptop to Peter, I would have liked to actually sign his key, and then he's going to be in control of the firmware updates that are going to happen inside of FlashKeeper. Then we will need a logic analyzer to be able to see what are exactly the delays that we have to deal with, because everything SPI is really, really time critical. For example, if your image is not ready at the moment that you power up your machine, the laptop just doesn't boot because there's nothing to boot from. So we need to have everything ready. There's time consideration for power up and everything that we need to figure out. So this is a reminder of an old dream that QSOS had. This is coming from 2017 post saying that 2 years later we would have like a level 2 stateless laptop, which never happened. I don't know the story there. I would love to know a little bit more, because like this is stating that there were partners that were going to do something about this. This kind of never happened. It says that in the immediate future, therefore, we intend to pursue a level 1 laptop. We can foresee multiple levels of compatibility. I don't think I have the quote here. Anyway, the point is there was supposed to be a stateless laptop, but it never happened.
However, we expect that it will be at least 2 years. At least 2 years.
At least 2 years, but I don't know.
A true stateless laptop can be created.
Can be created doesn't mean it will be created.
No, it could be. Yeah.
Just a speculation that it will be possible.
So if we read the paper of Joanna, basically her goal was to centralize the state. She was including also like the firmware of the SSD drive inside of this compounded like firmware, externalizing the state into something that she called the USB secure disk stick, and make states read-only. She was repurposing multiplexing USB pins, which doesn't seem possible. The plan was not a retrofit, but like a plan to actually convince OEM to be able to create that hardware out of thin air, like without any guarantee. She was planning into doing like read-only region, which were measurable, temper evidence, and what she envisioned was an SPI chip and FPGA inside of a chip to go into the direction of doing a stateless computer. What we have now is flash ROM with partial write protected region, like I said earlier. This is the step that happens like on a logical level, let's say, like on chips that are permitting write protection. And this is something that is available inside of 3M Dev Shop right now. So basically this is simulating the soldering, like it's just a jumper. On the hardware that we have today, like a lot of people go on GitHub and say that they are interested in this kind of protection to the moment that they realize that it implies like soldering and unsoldering, and people just give up on that dream. So a lot of interest to the moment like of realizing that it's not really practical and nobody actually want that. They dream of it, but they give up. So the step plan is the solder design. We can actually imagine just something like that. The idea would be like the FPGA and like the contact, like the FlashKeeper base would be soldered and something like that. The solderless design, we showed like the picture, like with the springs and everything. The idea here is a peel and stick plus mechanical design. So with some kind of guider, with a 3D printed thing, you would just like apply this like directly on your chip. It will guide like at the moment, at the good place to be able to just like push. And the glue with the device, with the chip, will make it like permanent, like forever. For that to happen and be successful, we will need to pass like drop and vibration tests, because like if it's not reliable, it means that at some point you lose the connection and then your laptop boots nothing. So that's kind of important. And the note here is that it would not be recommended for temper resistance, because there is no way you want something that is not soldered but with epoxy on top of it. Because if for some reason there is oxidation, or I don't know, the liquid of your resin is actually getting between the legs of the SPI chip, then you lose your laptop, and then you go with a hammer, and like that would not be a good plan. So even though we sold this idea to NLNet as being like a solderless design, the more and more we think about that, the more we realize that soldering will be most probably needed. I skipped the point for the solder design, but the solder design comes with a guider as well. We want this to be hot hair soldering, so that it's easy for OEM to be able to deploy this kind of setup, like without too much complexity. So the dream with that would be to have something that is as easy as a video to follow, and then you receive your kit, you put your 3D guider, you apply hot air on it, and it's gonna stay like forever. So the FPGA based verification and flash management, we will need a bigger board. The goal will be to debug and develop. That's mostly the DOID that will be in the call later. To do the write protection and reprogramming. At this stage, the user configured keys will be provided over the external SPA interface before flashing. Development of external USB programmer board for reprogramming and debugging FlashKeeper over external flash cable. So everything is mostly going to be outside at this point. And this base will be used to do the smaller FlashKeeper version, which goal is to be inside of the laptop or the device at the end of the project. How to secure the FPGA state. So now we introduce a new thing inside of the machine, which is supposed to secure the state. So how do we make sure that this thing will be able to secure itself? The FPGA bit stream, that's a term like of FPGA, is the first part that is able like to boot something else. Like I introduced before, the idea there would be the bit stream being able to have just enough bootloader alongside the bit stream to verify externally loaded firmware. As I said before, if we arrive to this and the timings are good and the FPGA is able like to boot fast enough, it would mean that we have an externally upgradable firmware, meaning that collaboration will happen. We have a high hope of this to happen. If it happens, then it's a success. Otherwise, like we don't know what we will do. Like it's a really important point. The goal is the bootloader provided signature verification of the loaded FPGA firmware against a provided user singing key built into the FPGA bit stream during the initial programming, and then the support for user authentication reownership, allowing a chain of replacement singing keys back to the prior owner and the key, the original key that is inside of OTP. And the real-time bootstream verification, this is where I am really interested. The goal here, if everything goes well, once again, is not only to have a bootstream verification, which is like just checksumming everything operation that happens like in a stream, but being able to have introspection enough to say, okay, so here we have IFD, we are able to jump fast enough to say, here is the boot block, like, and then being able to just hash specific section. If we're able to do that, we will be able to warn way earlier than waiting for all the boot stream, sorry, to be happening before being able to warn the user. So we kind of need to have like specific region, otherwise we will warn later. Exception maps are also expected. For example, the Raminit MRC cache might change. Sometimes there is bad implementation. If I think about the KGB 16, for example, like it reinitialized like the cache. Anyway, I've seen like wrong things happening there. So there are regions that we won't want to check because they might change. And I think about like configuration and anyway. So the mind game here is like to think everything forward, but the plan is made in such a way that we will be able to see things happen, hopefully. So, and the goal of all of this is being able to happen between 5 and 30 seconds so that the user waits for a beep before typing any secret. So basically this. Questions?
That is correct, but it's not screwed on. It would be adhesived on. Now there's attacks that you can always make to anything physical. And Thierry was talking, for example, about epoxying over the chip, which is something that I know a lot of people already do, even without any sort of active component embedded in there, just to try to guard access to the SPI pins themselves. The ideal future would be where he was talking about SPK modem. The ideal eventual outcome for this would be that by some external means, the FPGA would be able to authenticate itself to you in such a way that if it were replaced, the replacement not holding your keys would not be able to authenticate via the sort of SPK modem style thing T. Lorian was talking about. That is admittedly further than most of what we're pretty confident about right now, but that is something we've thought about, and it's worth noting that in the typical way we see this being installed, it's not as simple as take some screws out and change a board, if an attacker was going to try to replace the whole module. Your second question, I'm sorry, you were asking about the... What was your second question again? So the point of the FlashKeeper FPGA is that you don't need to rely on the SPI flash chip's write protection. I think something that should be clear, something that I should make clear is that we're talking about multiple stages of development on a project here. The first one that Telorian brought up was the piece that I refer to as the chip adapter, which is the actual thing that sits on top of the chip. That can be either soldered or solderless, and it can hold the write protect pin of the chip. So with the chip adapter, yes, you are relying on the flash chip's write protect. When you are installing an FPGA on top of the chip, that's when you're looking at what he calls introspection, what I would say authentication of the bootstream, where you're actually looking at what is being read out of the flash chip every boot, and you're hashing that to see if that matches a signature the FPGA is holding on to. In that case, you don't need to worry about whether the chip itself is enforcing write protection, because even if the attacker did write to it, then once the FPGA is there and it's doing that authentication, it's just going to fail the signature check at boot and alert the user. As for if you're going to solder, why not remove the As for if you're going to solder, why not remove the flash chip? The soldering, to me, like, I do this all day. Yeah, to me, that sounds reasonable. Just pull it off and wire whatever you want. To somebody who is not familiar with doing surface mount soldering all day, desoldering a surface mount chip and replacing it with something is a bit of a bigger ask than sticking a thing on top that has some pre-applied blobs of solder paste on its pads and heating it up with a hot air gun. So even when we're talking about the soldered version, we're not talking about the user's going to pull this chip off, clean the pads with wick, make sure they don't rip any traces, and then solder a little module on in place of it. We're talking about the user's going to stick something to the top and blow a hot air gun on it. And we don't actually really need to remove the flash chip itself, because even if we were to imagine a version of this that doesn't rely on the flash chip at all, as SpiSpy has demonstrated, because of the series resistors that manufacturers almost always put on their SPI data lines, you can pretty much just talk over the SPI flash chip without doing any damage, and it's probably easier to just let the user leave it on there and put whatever you want on top. Does that answer your question well?
Okay, thanks.
And it sounded like as text, Demi had a question. Okay, so she's asking about, for reownership, how will you ensure that the old key cannot be reused? We want to research whether it is possible to update something in NVCM, like to set an additional bit of NVCM after it is initially programmed on the ICE40. If so, we could have effectively a unary counter where we would say that, you know, we should be at key number whatever, and the key that's burned into NVCM already is key number this, so we're not going to accept these earlier keys. If that is not possible, unfortunately, that the very original owner would be able to reuse their key to sign future keys. Keys further down the chain would not be. If that is how it ends up being, yes, of course, that is a limitation of how reownership would be able to work on this. And if you were truly concerned about the original owner's keys, you would need to get a new FPGA and burn the NVCM yourself rather than buying a used one. Unfortunately, while the ICE40 is very documented, we're not sure whether it will be possible to burn over existing NVCM yet. That's not something I've found good documentation of, and it's probably just going to take some experimentation and probably effectively killing some FPGAs in the process, because it is a one-time programmability thing. So if that's possible, then yes, you can do like you typically would with one-time programmable memory, where you increment the unary counter and the old key is no longer valid. If that is not possible, then the original key will not be able to be truly removed. And in that case, the reownership, if you're concerned about that, you really should be going for a new FPGA, which won't be tremendously expensive. So unless this is a matter of somebody has some super valuable laptop motherboard and it's been epoxied on, it's not the end of the world to replace the FPGA if you really are concerned about that. Where will you store the persistent data? You're at
minutes left.
Okay, I'm just trying to answer Demi's questions. She says, where will you store the persistent data? Outside, so on the FlashKeeper FPGA. Oh, okay. I leave that call to you. Demi's asking questions in the text chat, but if you'd rather answer questions in person, we can do that too.
So for the
Just quickly for you, Demi, it's planned that the FPGA module would have its own, like, very small chip scale package, second SPI flash on it. Of course, the contents of that would be authenticated by the FPGA itself. So you don't need to reserve any of the host SPI flash, because the FPGA module, even though the FPGA chip doesn't, will have a little bit of flash of its own.
okay. So when you're evaluating options, did you consider going with some microcontroller and multiplexing to a real SPI flash, so you don't have to meet the timing requirement for SPI in the FPGA?
We did. The problem is not that you need to emulate the SPI flash. The way we're actually imagining the FPGA variant to work, we are not emulating the SPI flash. We are authenticating communication with the stock SPI flash chip. The reason we are unlikely to be able to get away with a microcontroller rather than an FPGA is that, for one, FPGAs provide a lot of flexibility around things like one-time programmable NVCM and things that we want for security. For two, when we're looking at things like real-time authentication of the stream going over the SPI bus, you want an FPGA because you can do things like a Blake2 hash in real time and like really tight timing, high throughput real-time verification, where you're not needing to build a full copy of the flash in memory and then come back and hash it with a CPU later. That allows you to really cut the amount of RAM that you need to have on there, which is important for this.
Yeah, I was thinking of verifying this pre-boot, so cutting down on your requirements. Obviously,
Well, the problem is you need to verify it. You need to verify what the PCH actually sees, because the PCH is communicating with the SPI flash chip. If you verify truly pre-boot, like you just have a thing that's sitting on there and it listens to, like, it talks to the SPI flash chip, checks what's in there, and then the machine boots, then you have a talk to vulnerability. Because imagine a glitchy, malicious, anything SPI flash chip, or even something somewhere else on the SPI bus, could provide a genuine image to FlashKeeper and a malicious image to the host when it boots. So you can't.
Little trust into your SPI flash. That answers my question.
Sorry, I don't fully understand. What are you saying?
Yeah, next guy here. So part of my question was already answered in the first question. But how far along are you in the development of the variant having the FPGA chip?
Done some tests, nothing talking to an actual SPI flash chip yet. As Telorian said, this project is early stages. I'm glad that he's presenting it early, but I expect that the next time we talk about this, we'll have a heck of a lot more to show for it. We've experimented with some of the parts of this that will be necessary, but like the chip adapter designs are moving. The FPGA stuff, I want to be honest with you, we do not have it authenticating an image on a real SPI flash chip yet. The project just hasn't been going long enough for that to be the case yet.
All right, and just something for consideration. Since you're expecting to be using hot air anyway, have you considered using lower temperature hot air solder mixtures instead of just glue or resin or whatever?
Yes, we have. We've considered low temperature solders, and it's definitely something we're going to play with. There can be metallurgical constraints in using different solder alloys together long term, but it's definitely something we want to look into, because especially if users are afraid that they're going to cook their board or whatever if they're too slow with it, low temperature solders are something we've talked about. And if it's something that comes pre-applied, that's something we can do.